Hello and a warm collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning. An old friend and an old acquaintance. Been on the show before. Great to have him back. Mr. Philip Calvert. How you doing, Philip?
Hey, Tyler. Good to see you again.
Absolutely, man. It's been a hot minute. As we joke, time goes by. I don't know. What is time? I don't know. Since COVID, I don't know. I don't have a very good collection. It's been a few years. We had a chance to work together on a past something I was very passionate about, something you were involved with, and I believe passionate about for a long period of time when you were working at International Justice Mission. You've had a few jumps and a few moves in the last few years, and you've recently landed as the Chief Development Officer at the Mustard Seed. And if you're in Calgary and you're listening, you probably know of and about, and I'll never assume. So I'm going to give you a second to give us a little bit of what's the Mustard Seeds all about, and then let's jump into what you've been up to the last couple of years.
Yeah. So again, thanks, Tyler, for having me back on. Like you said, it's been a hot minute. And it was just fun catching up and texting back and forth, kind of setting this up and what we're going to chat about.
100%.
So the Mustard Seed, for those that don't know, we're celebrating our 40th year this year.
Amazing.
So it was founded in 1984. It was founded by a group of people. Most notably from that group was Pat Nixon. So Pat was someone that moved here from the Lower Mainland. And he himself was experiencing homelessness, and was taken in by a group of Good Samaritans. One of those terms that still kind of occupies space in the public discourse.
I don't hear it. I don't hear the word Good Samaritan as much. I'm glad you said that. We'll circle back on that. Actually,
yeah, sure. Taken in by a group of 3 or 4 people at First Baptist downtown, and just helping out. Here's some soup. How can we help you, kind of thing. And that originally was called the Burning Bush, was this organization that was there. And they saw some leadership potential in Pat. And he ended up founding and starting a new organization out of the Burning Bush called the Mustard Seed in 1984. And since then, the Mustard Seed has grown quite a bit from being a place where people can kind of come and grab some flour and some soup to a full organization this last year. Between government contracts and philanthropic support, we're about a $68 million organization.
Oh, amazing! I was really curious, and also what metrics, because the 68 million is only relevant to how many people you get to help with that, right?
Totally, yeah, and we'll totally get into that. But it's not just Calgary anymore either, and so that's part of the story. It's now 7 cities. Oh, wow. And so it ranges from Kamloops in BC, and then Grand Prairie, Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, Medicine Hat, and then also just recently in Saskatoon. And so it's grown wildly, especially since COVID. So in the last 2 years, but also kind of started just before COVID hit. We all know the story of urgency that kind of exploded during COVID when massive job loss. And then since then, housing crisis and inflation shocks and all those things are all kind of contributing factors to poverty, both financially, but also socially, relationally. Division in politics even contributes to those kinds of things. And so we see a lot of acute need day in, day out in all 7 cities that we're in. We actually also field quite a few phone calls from other cities that look at us and say, hey, you guys know what you're doing. We don't really know how to manage the crisis that we have. And so can you come? Can you help? And so we field those calls, and we have a kind of a matrix that we put all those things through and kind of see, would our presence actually be helpful or not? And so we evaluate on kind of a case-by-case basis and kind of see how we can help and whether it's a good idea for us to get involved or not.
The 7 cities, what was the timeline on that? Was it a couple? And then all of a sudden, like you said, there's really been an explosion over the last few years. Where were you guys? Let's just pick 2000 as the pre-COVID timeline. 2019 or 2000, how many cities were you in then?
So we would have been in, so Edmonton was a second city. It was actually founded as the Mustard Seed independently under a separate board. And then those 2 organizations merged, I want to say somewhere in the range of about 20 years ago. So it was just the 2 of those for the longest time. And then Red Deer came online, and then Medicine Hat after that. And so that brings us to about 7 years ago. And then Kamloops came online about 5 years ago. and then Grand Prairie and Saskatoon are both within the last 18 months or so.
So from a growth perspective, relatively rapid in terms of the expansion.
Yeah. And accelerating.
Yes, no doubt. Curious, and maybe I'm trying to ponder this question and ask it in the right way. There's so many roots of this problem that whether it's the housing crisis and job and then politics, even talking divisional politics, so many factors. How much does the mustard seed get involved with some of the root cause, or are you much more focused on these are people that are in this position, we're going to help them? That maybe that upstream or where people are finding their way into this path, that's maybe outside of our purview. What's the balance of those two things? Does that question make sense? I'm trying to ask it diplomatically, but there's a whole bunch of root causes and there's a whole bunch of people that need help.
Yeah, totally. So let me take a step back first to kind of set some context. So homelessness, when most people think of homelessness, they think of somebody that's sleeping rough is kind of a terminology that we'll use. Someone that's literally outside sleeping on the ground, or living in a shelter, or maybe they're couch surfing, or maybe they're in a car, or maybe they're bouncing around from city to city and burning bridges along the way. There could be so homelessness is a spectrum. Okay. Not everybody is in kind of an acute situation where they need emergency aid right now. Some people are maybe on the edge. So maybe they have 2 to 3 months worth of rent in their timeline. Maybe they're making decisions around whether they're eating or paying rent. Maybe they're making decisions around their utilities. Like all these things can create a much more nuanced landscape than just kind of one word is able to encapsulate. But the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, they estimate that there's probably in the range somewhere between 235 to 300 or up to 300,000 people across the country that are experiencing homelessness, kind of within that spectrum. And that another third of people that are renting, so 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people across the country are worried about the potential of experiencing homelessness because cash flow is so tight. And so to your question of like, do we deal with the upstream versus kind of the immediate relief, mercy kind of type of dynamic? The answer is that the mustard seed has always been about the one who's at our door. Okay. So that's the way that we framed it. Kind of, it goes back to that foundation story with Pat and being that person that was helped by a group of individuals. But it's grown in our ability to understand kind of how to help, what helps look like, and kind of based in that story of that spectrum of homelessness. And so we have everything from shelters, right? And shelters themselves, those can range between dry shelters or behavior-based shelters. So not all shelters are even the same.
Okay. And
generally speaking, our shelter model, we would call it a housing-focused shelter model. And so what that means basically is that within our shelter, part of what makes our model a little bit different than some is that within our shelter, we have advocates that are built into the mechanism itself. And an advocate helps somebody in their journey to access the social service system. So do you need to talk to housing? Do you need to get rehab support? Like, what are the individual based needs that we can help you with? And then designing a catered plan for each individual when they're ready to kind of exit the cycles that keep them needing to access something like a shelter. And so in terms of like the impact numbers, because so you mentioned earlier kind of the $6 to $8 million and what does that actually equate to? So we have around 900 beds across our shelter network in all 7 cities. And our numbers on a monthly basis is that we'll have anywhere between kind of averaging between 14 and 17% of our people on a monthly basis are finding full-time housing. And so,
interesting. Okay. That's powerful.
Yeah. So if you extrapolate that out over a year, that means this last year we've taken 1,300 people out of our shelter network into full-time housing. And so it's a address the need that we see now, but it's also moving towards kind of a holistic, so like a hand up as opposed to just a hand out type of thing. Yeah. And then also we have community impact centers. And so those are completely different than a shelter. You can come in, could grab a cup of coffee, talk to one of those system navigators, those advocates, figure out what your needs are. Some of those are based in residential areas. Some of those are based kind of in connection with our shelters. And those are really kind of what we would call a bit of an upstream type of response, because it's more focused on people that are maybe worried about becoming homeless. And so how does that, what systems, what things are in place, what healthy community can help me kind of be more resilient against experiencing that? Okay. And so we have a ton of people that our foot traffic there is in the hundreds of thousands of people on an annualized basis. And then we also have health and wellness. So health and wellness, that could be everything from occupational therapists, volunteer doctors, nurses, massage therapist, foot clinics, kind of dealing with the actual health and wellness counseling kind of stuff that people are facing. And again, those typically are open to whoever needs it. So whether people that are actively experiencing homelessness or people that could be soon. And we find that we get a lot of people that come through that are just in need of help from a variety of ways. And our service model delivery means that we can offer services at pennies on the dollar compared to what would be available through an AHS or private insurance or those kinds of things. And so we find that we get a huge bang for our buck there as well.
I can only imagine, just listening to you talk, this has to be a considerable army of people to service. Like, it sounds like there is literally a one-to-one relationship with that 14 to 17%. Those are individual humans having individual experiences that then need to be stewarded or guided or at least even informed of what's available to them. That must be a hellish degree of people to do that. I use the word army very intentionally.
Yeah. So there's two parts of that. There's our staff and there's also volunteers.
Yeah.
So from a staffing perspective, we're about 800 full-time equivalency.
Okay.
So again, like most people hear something like that, and they're like, "Whoa, I had no idea that my team was that big."
That's why I love these conversations, folks. I'm like, "Oh wow, I didn't know." And why would you if you don't bump into it, right?
Yeah, totally. And then from a volunteer perspective, we have about 17,000 people that help out, and so that could be everything from companies that organize kind of days where they come and make sandwiches at a shelter for a couple hours, kind of thing. So our group volunteers, but then we also have kind of like professional volunteers, if you will, people that maybe they're retired or snowbirding or have a lot more time than the average folks do.
Yep. And they're in a position in their life where this fits.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have some people that volunteer 40 hours a week.
That's awesome.
And like they teach our staff like how to do their job. And
we've been here for long enough. Absolutely. Which is great. Exactly. Well, that is what's part of creates that community. Back to the 68 million just for a second. What's that funding model look like? What's private versus government funded? How if I was going to pie graph that out, what does that look like kind of in broad strokes?
Yeah. So we have, so like broadly speaking, about 60% of our funding comes through public sources, whether that's RFPs that we've applied for, or competitive RFPs sometimes, or government grants.
To put your services forward to fill certain needs that are then funded by whatever organization is putting out that request for proposal. Okay. Exactly. All right. Okay. I didn't know that it worked that way. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. So that's kind of one stream. Yeah. Another one would be kind of large government, like those quasi crown corporations like CMHC.
Okay.
So we have quite a bit of funding that comes through groups like that.
Okay.
Overall, kind of the government/public sources is about 60% of the mix.
Okay.
And then about 40% of our mix is private donations. And that ranges, so we have right now about this last year, kind of in the range of about 37,000 individuals that have donated.
Wow. And that's impressive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a huge number. And like, we're thankful for that. And lots of people like we just did a telethon thank you campaign internally where we had like 35 staff just working the phone for a couple of days. And we called, I think something like 3,000 individual donors just to say thank you. Largely tied to the postage strike that just happened and the community response we saw out of that.
The impact of that, the silent victims of that being the non-for-profit sector. Certainly,
yeah.
I've heard from multiple that just so many donors were so used to just mailing it in, literally.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And so we actually came out about 7% up through our Christmas period because we did a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes and did digital acquisition and all that kind of stuff. But we thought, well, let's get on the phone and just make sure that we're thanking people. This feels like the right thing to do. And the number of people that we talked to that are like 25 plus year donors, and just talking about all the things that they've been through and seen and iterations and all that kind of stuff. It's just a good reminder that not only do we have this like cloud of 37,000 people, but some of them have been with us for long, long time. And it's a real testament to kind of people having a huge heart for their community and wanting to see it better over a long period of time.
That's loyalty on every front. I do want to talk about the donor makeup a little bit, but I don't want to overlook the question around digital transformation and what's led versus what's forced. And things like COVID forced a lot of companies to digitize everything that they do. Postal strike also had that impact, especially if the main source of your funds were coming through the mail. I've also heard, and this could be a misnomer or maybe not applied to you, that sometimes the non-for-profit sector can be a little bit behind. It's not what gets focused on. We focused on, the funds go to our users, the people that we help, the people in need. Doesn't always go to, okay, we need to put X amount into some type of capital spend to innovate. That often gets sidelined in every company, not just not-for-profit. What's the balance, or kind of what have you seen, and what journey is the mustard seed on that front?
Just easy questions with no nuance, right?
Come on, Philip, you know me well enough. We're going to have a real chat. I aim to anyways.
Yeah. So the headline around that is that we've been working for kind of right before COVID towards weaning ourselves off of the need for direct mail and towards a digital future. That's where everything is going. The idea of direct mail as kind of the primary vehicle for fundraising, there's still a place for it. We still see quite a bit of, we call it influenced giving, that comes in via direct. So like someone makes a gift online, or calls. Like one of the things we have is a dedicated contact center as well. And so people will come in and they'll make a call or they'll make a note on an online gift under the reason why you gave is like, well, I received a notice in the mail. And so they're not responding via mail, but sometimes they're responding because
it's a catalyst in the journey. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Sense. Yeah. It's the reminder I needed to go online and do the donation.
Exactly. And so like we have a very integrated approach around that. So we do everything from out of home advertising. We have a lot of partners that donate very generously to some of the spaces that we're on, whether that be billboards, the number of media interviews that I did around the postage strike, and kind of posing for the camera in the mailroom type of thing, and making sure that the Herald has their clickbaity kind of thing right 100%, there.
Well, that is how that works. But
yeah,
but getting it out there, there's no getting yourself out there and reminding people. We all need to be reminded over and over and over. I had a politician tell me once, Tyler, once your constituency is getting annoyed by your messaging, that's when you actually know they're hearing you. I'm like, exactly. I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah. So like we have the out of home side of things. We have the partnerships through media. We're so thankful for side of things. We have a direct mail strategy that focuses kind of very intentionally around different segments that we have within our donor file. And so that's a thing that we have. We also have our online giving forms, kind of borrow from the world of e-commerce that has kind of like optimized giving based on online behavior. And so that's a piece of that. We have digital paid ads. We have influence ads kind of through digital streams. We have our own podcast that we're trying to get up and going.
Cool. Nice.
So like there's all these channels need to work together in order to kind of create that story, that journey, so that you're actually out there and trying to say a message. through our digital ads last year, we had 40 million impressions. And so it's...
Well, and to your point, it's not everyone maybe led to a donation, but everyone did lead to someone seeing your name and getting comfortable and that awareness. And you can't give to something that's not on your mind. You're not going to give to something that's not on your mind.
Totally. And like, it's very easy, and there could be a temptation. And like, I've worked in charity world long enough to know that there's a temptation of our message should sell itself, right? Of like, I work here, I believe in it, so therefore everybody else should believe in it. That's not how it works realistically, right? Like nobody knows as much about the mustard seed and the fundraising needs as much as me and my team do. And to try to assume or to make the assumption that people that we're talking to, the first time they hear it, they should respond. That's a bit of pharisaical thinking.
Yes, it is. I love those sometimes, and I'll be blunt. We expect other people to buy differently than how we buy.
Yeah.
When's the last time you saw something and leaped? And it's funny, I used to have a consultant at work. She called it quantum leap creative. That first time you see something that you're like, I could buy that. And her quantum leap was just the idea that you could buy it. You didn't even have to, like, the transaction might still be down the road. And she's like, that is so rare and so standout versus the small breadcrumbs and the little incremental build that finally goes, well, yeah, the mustard seed. How many times did you have to like pick away to get to that level of awareness? But we expect people to do it right away when we're launching a campaign, but we never do it ourselves. That always makes me laugh.
Yeah.
I've been many a boardroom where it's going to work this way. I'm like, okay, everyone, does it work that way for you ever? Like, where are we coming up with this dream idea?
Yeah, I remember like a decade ago, we used to talk about something like 12 to 15 meaningful touch points before someone makes a decision.
Yep.
That number has got to be way higher.
Last one I heard was like 36 or 38. I love that. I've used that stat in presentations. When I first got into marketing, it was probably 4 to 6. Wow. That also makes me sound old for starters. But I remember when it was 11 or 12, kind of what you're talking about. Then I saw another stat where it was in the mid 20s. And now it's I don't, and it's also so hard to attribute that, right? It's getting a bit, there's so many little slivers of moments that lead up to an epiphany, because maybe that's what it is when a brand finally gets on your radar. And then you have to contemplate actually transacting with them, which is a whole other journey.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and
I appreciate that. We can turn this into a marketing chat.
And then it's
all the same, right? Whether it's a product, it's a belief, it still falls under the same rules.
Yeah, totally. Like it's price, place, it's promotion, it's the vehicle, it's the messenger. All those things add up. They all have meaning. They all pull kind of that heartstring or that logic model in a certain way. You got to kind of have it all pointing in the same direction, broadly speaking. Mm-hmm. And all the channels, especially on a seasonality curve, have to be saying the same thing at the same time in order to kind of create urgency and create that package. Mm-hmm. So like marketing 101 for sure is a huge part of the work that we do here. But one of the things that, so like you and I first met when I was doing international development fundraising. Mm-hmm. And the message and the way of doing that is so vastly different than it is with the mustard seed, because there you have to paint a picture for something that is completely other, right? Like my lived experience is not slavery or human trafficking and theft of land from widows in Uganda kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that's so other, not only physically, but also conceptually. Whereas at the mustard seed, if you're walking to work and you're walking in a plus 15 and you change the side of the catwalk that you're in because somebody, maybe there's that spark of that moment of question of like, do I want to, what's going to happen? Is there a fear? Is there it could be a variety of reasons, right? Mm-hmm. Or you're walking outside and it's minus 20, like we're expecting this coming weekend. Yes. And so far it's been a pretty nice winter, but you see feet underneath a tarp, right? And like that's a person that's not that different than me. And so the how does the price, place, promotion kind of marketing network leverage itself towards somebody who's sleeping on cold concrete that you saw earlier today? Mm-hmm. That's a different conceptualization map than kind of painting a picture for someone on the other side of the world.
Well, I have to get you across the river one stone at a time. The other side of the river is a lot closer, and it's a lot more. The fees to me there feels like an ability to make it personal, and I like what you said. that's another human being, not that where the other side of the world is still conceptual for a lot of us, and it's an idea or a thing that's so foreign culturally, where this is a here problem and a now problem.
Yeah, totally. And like nothing focuses the mind like a crisis.
Yeah.
And
yes, a very true statement. As unfortunately our crises get more frequent and more and larger, but that's another. Yeah.
Anybody else?
We have a tariff crisis looming right now. That's the talk of the day.
Yeah.
When you talk about that level of awareness and connection, and you talk about donors that have been with you for 25 years, what about donors that have been with you for 6 months? What's the difference in that profile? Because I've talked to a lot of different non-for-profits, and the challenge of introducing, oh, that was my parents' charity, that's what they supported, I want to support something different. Like sometimes there's just that cycle, but also it's just education, and you're re-educating a whole new group of individuals to what's actually going on at maybe a point in their life where they're not as aware globally, but they're very connected to what's going on in their community, probably more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, these questions that have just short 3-word answers.
No yes, no maybes on this show for sure.
So there's broad spectrum in the philanthropic space. There's a mass migration happening, and it expresses itself through a variety of things. So the largest wealth transfer in the history of humankind is underway right now, right? So there's this huge movement within the philanthropic sector to focus intentionally around planned giving, legacy giving, talking to kind of intergenerational family planning, all that kind of stuff. That's a very real thing, and we're doing that. There's also a sense of a passing of the torch from people that it's the same thing in the corporate world, right? The stalwarts of industry, the stalwarts of development, the stalwarts of people that have made the place that we live what it is, are passing the torch to the next generation. And so that, along with that, comes this mantle of leadership, and how are we going to express the values that we live and that we've enjoyed? And so those values and the kind of that value-driven story is very much a part of what we talk about at the Mustard Seed, and kind of pride of place, right? And part of being pride of place is talking about the least of these, or the people that are on the margins, right? So you can't truly have a pride of place if the disparity is so rampant that it's almost ironic, right? Like you can't have opulent wealth staring directly into the face of desperate poverty. Like something about that as a Canadian is offensive to me.
I like how you said, even as a Canadian, because there's other parts of the world where that is the status quo, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. But kind of that idea of values and who are the next leaders that are taking up that place. And so that's a conversation that's happening. Okay. But then you also have this like quick hit dopamine level microtransaction thing that is so a part of our society now, where it's like that first gift of that donor that gives because they saw a digital campaign around Christmas and thought, well, here's $10. And then how do you get from that first gift to that second gift? Yeah. And then how do you increase the average size of that gift? How do you invite people in so that it's not just something they saw on Instagram, but it becomes something that's far more real? These are all like very challenging questions that every charity wrestles with, including us.
Well, turning it from that transactional dopamine to a relationship with meaning and depth and a longer term vision. And, how do you turn a one-time donor into a 25-year donor? Yeah. And that's no easy journey in the world of mass distractions and mass stimulus, as my phone is within my arm's reach and yours. And most people are probably listening on their device while also surfing Instagram while they're listening to us right now.
Totally.
And you think about that the attention society in those moments, if you can strike that moment, but how do you pull it past that? And that's with really understanding who your audience is, and being really, back to your point about using all the tools, being very effective at communicating with them and forging a relationship, which sometimes has a big chasm in between, which is digital. Yeah. They know a lot about us, we know a lot about them, but there's still a gap. There's still a difference when you make it personal or you come down. I've been involved with CUPS for many, many years. And the first time I went down, I met the executive director. I really liked what they're doing, but it was all just intellectual, until I went to the center and saw the kids and went, wow, if I wasn't here and I didn't make this donation, I wouldn't have had, and that was 16 years ago. So there's my own story. That's
totally.
100%
that. So my own story a little bit is that one of those kind of like crossing the chasm between the digital to the actual relationship. happened for me at the Mustard Seed probably 10 years ago. In that,
oh, cool.
Yeah, in that I was doing an Advent campaign that we had, right? So this idea of kind of coming up to Christmas, and what do we set aside? What do we think about? How do we prepare ourselves for Christmas and all that kind of stuff, right? Like within the Christian world, it's a very big thing. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the Mustard Seed has done over the years is encouraged families to pack backpacks with 25 different items that we see as kind of like a general needs, kind of like survival pack for the streets, right? So that could be lip balm, that's socks.
It's kind of like your go bag, right? Everyone who's a prepper has a go bag. Yeah, but just for everyday life, what do you need to survive in that world? It can be very, very harsh and minus 30 at times, right?
Yeah. And so for my wife and I talking with our kids, we're like, well, what do we do for our Advent this year? It's like, well, this Mustard Seed has this campaign going on. And then we did that. So every night when we do a little reading with our kids and kind of remind them about kind of the Jesus story within kind of the Christmas season. Mm-hmm. And then we're unpacking these things and filling up backpacks, right? So like this moment of doing this thing together as a family, as a part of a rhythm of life, was kicked off because of an Instagram post. And then that brought us down to the donation center on Center Street and 11th Ave, where I'm talking to you from, and having our kids hand over the backpack to the street level worker, right, is a cementing that's a core memory moment for our kids. And so like they still bring that up to me of like, oh yeah, like that was so fun, that was so awesome. And
you gave them an experience, which at the end of the day, we're meaning making machines, and nothing creates meaning like an experience, right?
Exactly.
Back to just, yes, we've evolved as humans, but we're also still kind of the same in a lot of ways.
Totally. And so like that's one of those things where it's creating that experience. It's creating, and the meaning making machine thing, like common experiences is also a huge part of that, right? Yeah. So whenever we can make it communal, so we have a thing coming up on February 22nd. Lots of charities do it, called the Coldest Night of the Year. Right. So it's just it's a walk where you walk. It could be 2K, 3K, 5K.
Yes, I'm aware of it. Yeah, I'm aware
of it. And it's another good chance to just kind of do a community meaning thing. And it's kind of it's soft empathy building. Right. Like, what does it mean to walk outside potentially when it's minus 30? Mm-hmm. All that kind of stuff. And so anyway, those are the types of things that we try to do to move from the Instagram post or the Reddit ad, all that kind of stuff, down to, okay, let's get down to brass tacks. Where are my feet? Where are my hands? How can I help?
You made a few references earlier, Good Samaritan, Burning Bush. These are obviously a little more religious in terms of Christian in their overtones. This is a Christian organization, and I know a lot of these started off that way, but they've become a lot more broad over time. And I've seen that with a lot of different organizations that were started very faith-based and have broadened out to be a little more inclusive, or to just be there to help. Is that a similar journey for the Mustard Seed? And again, no right, no wrong, no good or bad. I'm just always curious. I love a good origin story. I'm a marketer. I love a good how we got to here.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a Christian organization. Still is a Christian organization, and has no intention to be anything other than that. And I would say that that word Christian is worth unpacking.
Oh no, this is where a whole other podcast starts. I knew when I was opening, when I said, oh yeah, I'm going to float this question, just because I also see it as potentially something that's really allowed you to grow, because that, shared common story, shared common values, there's a lot of power that can come from that as well, in a world where people get fired up about things, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons.
Totally. And the term Christian, like even right now, you just look south of the 49th parallel, and the term Christian is being drugged through politics, like in a crazy way that 20 years ago, I would have never thought would be possible, to be honest.
That might not be helpful to anyone or anything. But
Yeah. And, being used as a pretext for all kinds of human rights violations, right? Like it's just, it's wild to me. And so I think that what's worth unpacking, I don't want to get too political, is the idea.
Yes, let's move cautiously.
Yeah.
Well, so we're 34 minutes in. If someone's still listening, they're like, I'm really curious what these guys have to say about stuff.
Yeah. So Christian to me means like even just like the history of like the etymology of the word means those Christ-like ones, right? It was originally a derogatory term that was used within the Roman Empire to say those people are crazy, essentially, right? And because they're so focused on other people, they're so focused on helping people, they're so focused on not centering themselves. Like why are they so crazy? Right? Is the way that I think of that term.
Yep.
And so when I say that the Mustard Seed is a Christian organization, what I mean by that is it's an entire organization, an apparatus of systems and strategies and capabilities and all the things that goes into an organization that's relentlessly pursued around the other. That's relentlessly pursues people that need help. And so it's kind of like that derogatory term. It's like, why are you guys so crazy about
helping others? I really like how you framed that. That was expertly done, sir. It can be so polarizing, like you said. It's being weaponized in so many crazy ways. But if you bring it back to the kind of crazy that you're like, we are that kind of crazy. We're very proud of it. Just to play with that term very loosely, of course.
Yeah, totally. But that's the way that I see it. And like our staff internally, like that's what they do. Like I'm a fundraiser, I'm a manager.
17,000 volunteers. Somebody's motivated by helping others. You don't get those kind of numbers because it doesn't mean something to you, right?
Exactly. So it's a deep value place. I
can only imagine that's contributed directly, just the idea of shared story and Christian organization, there's a shared story around that I can only imagine that other cities or other towns that go, oh, I get you, I can relate. Boom. I'm only imagining that it's helped kind of open the doors and kind of sow the seeds of growth.
Yeah. And, like in the business world, we talk about competitive advantage, right? And one of the things that is a competitive advantage for the Mustard Seed is that we bring a deep bench of very, very committed people with us. And that's born out of the Christian identity. Because of that value kind of perspective around that. And so we get calls from governments all the time. Like within the fundraising industry, there's this question of like, do you maintain a Christian thing or not? Because that could provide...
I've run into that in some of these conversations I've had too. Right? Yeah.
And for us, it's a competitive advantage, even in our government relationships, because what it does is it allows us to mobilize people in a way that wouldn't be possible otherwise.
Well, there's part of the story you don't have to tell. You can just say one thing and they go, oh, I get it. You've been in a lot of organizations over the years in this nonprofit space, and the balance, and I think it's Dan Pallotta, there's different people out there very outspoken on, we need to run these more like a business so then we can therefore be more successful and therefore help more people. What's your perspective just on sometimes, I don't know, I've run into organizations that are like, we need better business acumen so that, but that takes away from our value. I'm like, well, more successful means more people helped. I don't know. You've lived in this space way longer than I have. I'm looking in from the outside. What's your perspective on that? Should it even be a question? Should we even have to ask it?
Well, can't two things be true at the same time?
Yeah. Well, we like binary in our world these days, don't we? So then we can argue about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like our CEO here, his name is James Gardner. He's a banker by background, right? Like
all right, well, he's kind of answered my question.
Yeah. He's been high up in the world of BMO for years, and so he thinks through like strategy and then how do you scale strategy through behaviors and model. Like
I love
that's the way that we run this as an organization.
Well, I look at your growth. Again, results kind of speak for themselves, right? So I could answer the question just by looking at the numbers and the amount of people that you're able to impact. I'm still hanging up on the 17,000 volunteers. That's a real number. That number's got some weight. 37,000 people in your donor base as well. That's a significant CRM to manage.
Yeah.
Back to like, these are business challenges, and I've yet to meet a company that's like, oh my God, our CRM is chaos. That is your success. That is your ability to serve all of these individuals. Mm-hmm. Is that 37,000 number tied to the full time, tied to the because unfortunately the need seems to be self-fulfilling. You're then building an apparatus to meet it where it's at. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And like on the CRM point, like we use Salesforce, and happy to do that because we have modules and kind of customizations within there that serves the donor side of things, and that serves the volunteer side of things. And so like in my portfolio,
you have many communities to serve through that list, right? It's not just the donor base, right?
Yeah. So like my portfolio, I oversee our donors, kind of all of our fundraising, but I also oversee some of our government relations. I also oversee our volunteer services group, as well as our community engagement. And so like I'm in Salesforce all the time, right? And thinking about journeys and Marketing Cloud within Salesforce and all that kind of stuff. And
I appreciate that level of sophistication. It's sometimes easy to underestimate that there is a well-oiled machine running behind the scenes, and the more effective that apparatus is, like you use that word, I like that a lot. That apparatus is doing its job, the more people it can help. Like the outcome is measurable, and nobody's going to question that it's needed. Unfortunately, the need is probably going up. I'd be scared to guess.
Totally. Like scale is enabled through systems. Like, and there's no shortcut around that.
Can we scale this? Yes, we can. How has been the transition from you? And you touched on it a little bit, so maybe I'm just picking up low-hanging fruit here, but working on a global mission, IJM, obviously the massive need, the numbers are mind-blowing. When I first got introduced to that organization, it kind of floored me. But you're now in your own backyard. There's got to be something about that, both are awesome. And I'm sure there was a lot of fulfilled days, a lot of frustrated days. Talk to me about the transition to kind of working in your own city as well as others. But, you are at your location where people are being helped and fed and housed right now.
So on the human side of that, I would say that there is no difference, like at all.
Nice.
There is a human somewhere that needs help. And so my career has been about how do I organize support around making sure that human gets help. That's who I am. And like on a very, very deep level. In terms of the kind of local versus global dynamic of that, there's so much nuance in that. It's like in a not insignificant way, the business side of my brain gets kicked in more in some ways when I think about that question, because it's what's the environment that it's in. So that could be as basic as weather, all the way through to like what's the political situation that this person who needs help is living within. What's kind of the measure of chaos and the measure of ability to affect that person's life with the tools that I have available to me. So like that's a part of that question for me. But then also a part of it is really rooted in my kids, right? So exposing my kids to what the world can be versus what the world is, that's a very different story to tell, because it kind of the in-your-face dynamic versus the, kind of shudder to say this, but kind of like the romantic overseas story, right? And so I would say that working within the local environment is way less kind of hero-making work, in air quotes, and way more community mobilization work. And so in the international development space, the archetypes that move people and kind of move the needle towards making a gift or doing something is based around these exceptional individuals, which I've had the pleasure of meeting and calling my friends that are legitimately exceptional people. It's like, wow. And like that's a part of the story there, somewhat by necessity, because you kind of from a storytelling lens, right? The hero's journey makes sense in kind of the international world, because you need that centering metaphor of an individual that's going where I can't, and all those things. Versus the local stories, there's way less heroes. There are, but there's way less of them. And those that are, the story is nowhere near as loud, because it's a collective journey story. It's not a hero's journey; it's a collective journey. And so it's much more based around the brand of the organization, as opposed to the individual within that organization, if that makes sense. It's kind of...
Strangely, yes, it does. As a big advocate of the hero's journey, and for anyone who's not familiar with the term, please just Google Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, and then wipe out the next 3 hours of your day with the rabbit hole that you're going to go down. And the hero with 1,000 faces, if you want to listen to the interviews, this series of interviews he did at the end of his life, it's phenomenal around the hero's journey.
Stuff.
And if you've ever watched Star Wars or the Hunger Games, like literally it's the hero's journey or the heroine's journey in the case of the Hunger Games, like done to a T. But I love what you said about the collective journey and why, like the brand of the mustard seed. And again, thinking about IGM and some of the individuals I met there, you're layering into this very global, very abstract, mythical story focusing on the hero makes a lot of sense, but when it's in your own backyard and you can drive by and see it, the idea of like a collective journey, that's really powerful. I think you explained that incredibly well, Philip. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
You're giving me stuff to ponder. I will ponder this after this call.
That's good.
I've never heard it really framed that way, but understanding what allows one to be successful versus the other and why it's different. And I just love how much more inclusive and the ability to be part of that collective seems so much more accessible when it's in your backyard. And it should be, because you're working to solve some of the needs and the challenges that you can literally see walking in the plus 15, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and like the crazy thing is, in a way, it's the psychology of the North American comes in here, because the lever of the hero's journey in the international development space is a bit of a false narrative in some ways, because the actual work that's happening on the ground is just as equally a collective journey.
Yeah. But that's hard to promote or hard to communicate effectively. It's kind of what we're talking about, the way to message it, not that there isn't a whole bunch of people working on the ground to create change. And some of the IGM stories that's a whole team of people that show up to solve some of these challenges, but to tell the story is what we're talking about, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Oh, that's really interesting. So and was that something you were really aware of, or something that's kind of become more clear to you as you yourself are going the journey?
Yeah. Well, it's
learning every day, Philip. Learning every day.
So much. Like I remember in the IGM world, like when I gave the TEDx talk here in Calgary, which I think we ended up being introduced kind of as an outflow of that in some way.
I've watched it a couple of times. It's quite good. I would recommend it. Like anyone who's done a TED talk, you get double thumbs up for me on that one.
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about the behind the scenes stuff around that? That's another whole conversation.
Which we have as well. So we'll save that for another podcast.
That's good. But that, in a way, was kind of like my dip in the toe of the world of like being a part of that hero's journey storytelling device in order to kind of be that. And then coming into the mustard seed, it's not that at all, right? Like I do so many media interviews, like we said, during the postage strike and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't about me. It was about the stats. It's about the stories. It's about the individuals. It's about centering the voice of the person whose feet are sticking out underneath that tarp as you walk to work. That's all part of it. And in like super not insignificant ways at all, it doesn't matter if it's me or somebody else, like at all.
Yeah. Which really is more powerful from a brand building exercise perspective.
Yeah,
and it has potential for longer, bigger reach with less risk of that individual not being there or changing, because that's what happens. It's, pick your mascot wisely, because that can really be challenging for a lot of brands. And they've had those kind of major kind of spearhead, high impact, high charisma leaders, influencers leave, and the organization took years to recover from that. And there's lots of case studies about that. It's obviously not what we're going to get into, but I appreciate the brand of the mustard seed and your role as fitting into that, not being it.
Yeah, and like
really cool insight.
Yeah, and like just to add a little bit more nuance into that. So like I'm a student of leadership. Like that's what my master's degree is about and all that kind of stuff. And there's kind of one theory within leadership is transformational leadership theory, right? So that's that charismatic figure. That's the hero's journey. That's all those things. Versus more of like a systems leadership theory, or a power-based leadership theory, or there's all these like kind of micro ones within there. There could be influence leadership theory, or arts-based, or like there's so many, like I can nerd out about this for a very long time.
Leadership is a very deep rabbit hole in itself, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So like I would say that the underpinning of kind of the leadership theory at the mustard seed here has less to do with the transformational theory and more to do with the systems, because it's about mobilizing mass groups of people. So like that 17,000 volunteer number, that equates to 135,000 hours. Okay. Wow. So that is impossible to do as one charismatic leader. That's actually impossible. But through a system that's enabled to make sure that people can do their job well and effectively, and again and again and again and again and again, that's how you get to that 135,000 hours. Not because of one speech, but because of a whole bunch of people doing their job.
well-oiled, well-tuned machine versus a charismatic leader that when they leave the room, the charisma immediately starts to evaporate versus a system that's going to be there next Tuesday as much as it is 5 Tuesdays from now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's great. I feel like this is a whole other podcast on Philip's leadership rabbit holes. Today at 5. Yeah. Philip, thanks. You gave me some really good things to think about today. I joke many times, I haven't said it for a while. I would do this if no one listened because I get to have conversations like this with people that are very invested, highly talented, and really bought into what they do. And I've thought that about you since the first time we've met. So when I had the opportunity to talk to you about this new journey and a brand that I'm aware of, and I now have a whole different respect for. So I do also behoove everyone out there, learn a little bit more. When you think you know something, you probably only know 25% of it. Dig in a little bit more. And I think a lot of the non-for-profits in our city do incredible work. And we see the names, we see the logos, we see the Instagram posts. Take that little extra step, and it can be tough because there's a lot of demands out there, but find out what resonates with you. And learning more is how I get there personally. So I'm espousing my own personal views. If someone wants to donate, obviously you've got a powerful website, theseed.ca. If someone wants to chat with you, wants to learn more, what do you recommend? What's your favorite way to connect in the world of a million ways?
Yeah. I'm a little bit old school in the sense of, just send me an email.
I appreciate it. It still works. Email works.
Yeah. Surprise. It's just Phil Calvert. So PhilCalvert @theseed.ca. And I'd love to chat.
I love that it's just theseed.ca. It's kind of punchy. I do like it from a naming perspective.
Yeah.
And I do also appreciate the power of getting the right URL. It can be very tricky for any business. Philip, it was amazing having you on. It was good to reconnect. Thank you for the work you do in our city, your passion, and thanks for being so candid today. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. You always have those good questions. So
I promise next time will be the same.
Okay, that's good.